I'm Reed Peterson, and welcome to Grief Refuge. Thanks for listening today and trusting Grief Refuge as a resource to help you cope with your loss and navigate your grief. I'd like to personally welcome you, whether this is your first time listening or if you've heard my voice before. Grief Refuge is about providing daily support to help you find peace and purpose after experiencing a death-related loss. This podcast was created with the intention to help validate the hardship you're experiencing, to help you take time to reflect, and to honor your loved one. Here at Grief Refuge, we focus on providing insights and support to help you learn healthy ways to manage grief. We're also here to comfort your aching heart, soothe your grief-related anxiety, and share wisdom and perspective for finding a way to embrace life and move forward again. Grieving is hard and it hurts. I'm glad you're here, and I promise to do everything I can to provide the best support to you. Before we begin, I want to mention a couple important points. Because of the depth and the nature of this topic, it may be more beneficial to not multitask while listening. Rather, I invite you to use this time for your self-care and your personal reflection. Please use this time to settle in and relax and allow your grief-related feelings to run their course. So if anything, please use this time to mourn your loss. Also, this podcast publishes episodes once or twice a month. So when you're grieving, that's a lot of time in between each episode, and you likely need more support and more resources. If you're in a place of needing more support, download the Grief Refuge app. The Grief Refuge app shares messages of support every day. There's several features to help you through the grief process, and I promise you that your feelings will feel validated. The Grief Refuge app is easy to find. It's a free download on your phone's app store, so please download it now to get started. Thank you, and let's move on to today's topic. Today's episode is a sequel to episode 64, titled As a Grieving Spouse. But today, we get to hear the experience, the perspective, and the support provided by a grief counselor. First, if you haven't listened to episode 64 yet, please go listen to that now. This episode will actually make more sense after hearing the experience shared by Marv, which was episode 64's guest. On today's episode, Carol Goldfain Davis will share what she observed in Marv's process when he experienced anticipatory grief, experienced deep sorrow, and her reflections on his journey for how he coped and how he found his footing in life again. Carol's empathy clearly speaks as she shares several reflections from Marv's journey. It's remarkable to know that there are people on this planet who can show up for others in this way. Carol and Marv also collaborated to create the book When the Rocks Sing, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Please enjoy this unique and special conversation with Carol. Marv's done such a beautiful job of articulating some of his loss with Marty and some of his grieving process. I'm just really curious to start with you right off the bat. How would you describe the Marv you saw after Marty's passing?
When I first met Marv, he was in the same room with Marty. I joined them as they had requested some help through the hospice organization. And because she had this terminal diagnosis, very difficult. When I met him, he was very open, almost childlike, very, very attentive to Marty. And that's probably what struck me more than anything, is that he was so in tune with her needs, our needs, everything. He was just very tuned in to all of the details of caring for someone that has just found out she has this terrible terminal disease. So he struck me as very involved, very cued in, very Um, I do think there was a lot in his own being that was probably very fearful. It's a terrifying thing to discover that your wife is, you don't know how long you're going to have her. He's madly in love with her and she with him. So it was a fabulous love story. From the moment I saw them, I could pick up on that relationship they had that was very close. And that in itself was almost a little unusual, but his ability to understand what she was trying to communicate, she had begun to, was impressive. She had begun to not be able to say more than one or two words and then could not finish her sentence because the cancer had affected her brain. So that was devastating for him because communication was so important between the two of them, speaking and sharing that way. Let's see, what did I see about him? I'm thinking mostly his devotion to her, his ability to put things in a perspective of we will figure out a way for this to work, was also a little bit impressive, because I think it can be terrifying and you kind of fall back and go, I don't know what to do. Please help me. But there was not that level of distress. I think he felt like, I know I can offer something, which I really appreciated about him. He knew he could do something, which was just really ultimately to be there for her. That was his role, to be the husband, and he needed us to step in. He did have to do caregiving, absolutely. And that became a role for him, but he needed us to take us, the hospice staff, the nurses and myself as a social worker, to take some of that medical portion of care out of his hands, out of his having to do it, so that he could be also that husband that he enjoyed being for her.
So as you entered working with Marv and Marty still being alive, I'm really thinking about grief in and of itself. Was there, did you see, I feel silly asking, Carol, to be honest, but did you see anticipatory grief?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's an excellent question, Reed. He definitely was anticipating and fearful of that. He wasn't sure how much influence he or the doctors could have to create a longer period of time they would have together, as opposed to the cancer is just going to do what it's going to do. It's going to take over. It will be what ends her life. He knew that. So he was kind of moving back and forth between, which is really what happens, I think, all the way through grief. You're back and forth on, in one of our chapters, we've referred to the idea of being on like a tightrope. You're balanced. On one side, you have these horrific fears of what is life going to be like? How can I live without her? I don't think I can. She means so much to me. My heart is breaking. And on the other side, I'm grateful I'm still with her. She's still here. I need to keep her from hurting. And so you have all of these feelings that are in balance, or you're trying to create a balance, which is really difficult to do. But that showed, you could see both the fear of what was ahead and the unknown. I think that, and an appreciation. So that's that sorrow and joy kind of working together in his life. But he also, something that I know he has spoken about in his book, had a sense with Marty that they would not be afraid of something that they didn't know, because it may not be as horrific and completely a terrifying situation as he had anticipated. So that was a little bit unusual too, because most people don't say that I'm not afraid of what I don't know. That is where a lot of fear comes from, the unknown. So he was a little unusual in that aspect.
Carol, after Marty had passed, and it doesn't have to be immediately after, but what kind of shifts did you see in Marv's grief process, and how did it impact how you were going to show up in the work that, or in the support that you provided, Marv?
He was as completely distraught and devastated, I think, as anyone I've seen. He was just, because they were so close and she was so important to him, he was just, I'm trying to think of a more powerful word than devastated. Um, he was not his happy, communicative, hopeful self. All of a sudden, everything had been taken from him. And I think that's what we feel when you lose someone that is that close to you. It's just like, it's a shock. He was truly in shock. And his body displayed, even in physical ways, that shock. He had a couple of situations where, and I think we've referred to this in the book, where he just felt like he wasn't even in his body. He just had this sense of, I can't experience, I can't function, I can't think, I can't feel, I can't, my body is walking, but I'm not in it, I don't think. I mean, it was just a very odd, it's a kind of a depersonalization type of a situation that you do. And that's how your body copes with, this is just too much. I can't absorb all of this at once, this loss. So he did sink to a very deep place of just sadness and tears. And I actually was grateful for the fact that he could cry, as many people have difficulty crying. And it seems especially that kind of traditional thought that men have difficulty crying, but especially, with me. But he relaxed enough that he did what he needed to do, which was just let out some of that pain. It was just a very painful, actually the pain was fairly palpable. It was a kind of this perhaps visceral feeling. He said he had imagined it was as if she had been torn from his body, which is another, it's been described by other researchers as a real experience that people have when they've lost something, and it just throws them completely out of their normal world. So yeah, he sunk deeply into that place, and would talk and call me and reach out when he needed that, when he was just really stuck there and didn't know what to do, which was also a huge benefit to him, to have someone to talk to. It doesn't even really matter who, except you need someone that will probably listen more than speak. So that part is important, that they know their job is not to fix, but just to hear you say, I can't stand this anymore. I want her back, or I want to be with her. What can I do? This pain is too much. I can't think. When you're feeling like that, you just need to be able to express it. And I think perhaps we have a feeling that we want to withdraw. And I'm sure that was internal within him as well, because he did go off by himself sometimes and just, he said he would sit in his car and just bawl, or he'd be sitting by the river and just cry, or he would be in his room, or something would remind him of Marty, and he just had no footing. So until he could gain that, he just needed a place to cry and be sad. So yes, he did experience that for sure.
Thanks for communicating that. And then, Carol, you've got these tremendous skills of listening, and I'm just so curious, in the professional work that you do, knowing how important listening skills are to help support grieving people. With your specific experience with Marv and his grief journey and process, did anything stand out for you that helped either solidify your skill of listening or deep listening, or something that happened in the relationship between the two of you that, kind of taught you more about this sense of listening skills as a grief counselor?
Ooh, interesting question. Let me see. As you asked me that question, I thought of one time. Actually, it happened a couple of different times with Marv. We would be sitting and he would just be sharing and talking. And I um, sort of the joy of actually being in the room with someone. This is pretty good, but it's kind of nice to be in that same room because you can see an entire body and you can sort of get what else is going on with that whole picture that you might miss with just just the voice. But at least I'm grateful we can at least see each other on this video, so that's helpful. But I noticed his whole body language. I would notice what he did do or what he didn't do. And the interesting thing for him, I remember at one point he had shared something really special. It was a memory that he had had with Marty. And we were just sitting there and I just listened. And I don't even remember having any response, but I think we just sat there and thought about that. And we were quiet for some time, just being there in the moment together, which is sort of odd and unusual because you feel like you've got to fill that space with words and advice and all of that, which isn't always helpful. But just sitting and kind of dwelling on the memory that he'd shared and just being still. And it struck me because that happened on a couple of occasions where we would just be sitting and we'd just be quiet and just sit there together. And that was enough, which is kind of, I don't know how profound that really sounds, but that is what I think being with someone sometimes entails. So it's probably counter to our scientific wanting to fix mindsets, but it was very important.
Definitely. So it's a beautiful articulation. And it reminds me of in the work that I learned from my mentor, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, he refers to it as sacred silence. Right. And so in those moments, yes, it is so counterintuitive because we think that, with words and verbalization, it helps fill the space that provides comfort, that provides, a guidance, whatever the intention may be at the time. But we also come to learn that, oh my gosh, silence can be just as powerful. And unfortunately, yes, with technologies or, such as talking on the phone and or, using video conferencing technologies, it doesn't feel as comfortable, at least in Western culture. I've experienced that tremendously, where it almost feels awkward because, especially during video conferencing, you have two individuals, perhaps maybe a little bit more, where you're kind of like looking at little rectangles of each other, and that just does not feel natural. But thank you for such that beautiful articulation of like being in the same physical space together, because one can observe more going on than just the words being spoken. Right. And most likely one has the ability and the skill set to kind of feel into, what the experience is like for the griever in that setting. Thank you, Carol. Carol, what was your response when Marv likely communicated to you that he was going to go do some traveling?
Two responses. First, I'm grateful he has the means by which to do that because it's a terribly expensive thing to take a train or a plane or a bus or something. But that he was very brave and courageous to take that step. I felt like he was pushing himself a bit, and it would be hard, perhaps lonely. He had not done that before. And I know he had mentioned earlier that he had taken a trip by car and realized Marty wasn't sitting beside him to interact about the beauty that they were seeing in the trips they would take around Colorado and various other places. But for him to choose to do something bigger, make reservations at some place, interact with people about just the details of travel, and to actually go and do it on his own without her, I just felt like it was a very courageous step. And I just wanted to be his biggest cheerleader at that point. Like, you go, you do what you need to. I'm on the other end of the phone. We had time differences in various places he had gone. And he was respectful of that. He really didn't call me a lot, but sometimes just knowing you can reach someone is helpful. And I usually will tell people have 3 people in your speed dial because one of them might not answer and you might need the second one. But I really was rooting for him because to me, that particular stretching for him to be able to be comfortable in his own space enough to do something challenging, cognitive as well as physical. I was just real proud of him for doing that. And I think I might have been a little bit more chicken, a little longer. To get out there into the world feels well, it's just that unknown again, which can be frightening. I don't know who I'm going to run into or what it's going to be like, or if I can do this, can I do this? And he began proving to himself, I can do something. I can make the plane reservation. I can get on the plane. I can talk to the person next to me, perhaps. Or I appreciated his being willing to stretch and move and do something new. Really, I was pretty proud of him.
Carol, I assume that when Marv and you were communicating about this idea of writing a book together, it probably was the first time anybody's, or a client, or someone that you work with. I assume it's the first time anybody has asked you something like that. Like, what came up as far as your thoughts or your feelings in regard to Marv and you talking about this idea of co-authoring a book together?
I love that question because I struggled a bit at first thinking, wait a minute, client counselor relationship is incredibly confidential. And that's the beauty of it, is that it is completely private. And they can say what they need to. They don't have to be judged by anyone else's voices or their information is private. So the confidentiality of it was a bit of a struggle for me to think, ooh, can I actually say, does he actually want me to say to the world what we talked about? Is that fair to him as he works through such an intimate situation? And he was willing, more than willing, to actually do that. We talked about that because he said, no one, if someone had told me what I might face, it would have been helpful. And that's what he wanted to do for other people. So I thought, okay, so I will just guard those very private moments and bounce them off of him before I say anything about it to anyone else, sharing which story is too much information for the rest of the world to have, and which feels helpful to other people. So I think one of the things that has really struck me as we had worked together in all of these stories is the level of intimacy that he was willing to share in his own telling of his version of the story. To me, it was extremely intimate because he was struggling at this deep, deep, deep level of affection and love and privacy and specialness that he had with his wife. He's sharing that even in the moment of her death, which was really the pinnacle of the whole experience for him. The beauty of it and the sadness of it, as he shared that, I'm just thinking this is the most intimate information that you can give. And he gave it willingly. He had a need to share it with me. I didn't know if he had a need to share it with the world, but he felt like it might help someone else. And I said, okay, let's go for it then. And so we did. We talked about all kinds of things, probably every single thing you can talk about, because that's what comes out. And that's what's helpful, is just to say, I have a place to do this. But no, originally I was very hesitant just because of the confidentiality of that relationship that people need to know they have with their counselor.
Yeah, it cracks me up just thinking, how wonderful to be asked like that, but also just really outside the norm, right?
Very
Outside
much
the norm
so.
of the scope of your work.
That's right. It was. And I had to measure that really. Yeah. Yeah, even in the relationship, it still stays that same professional relationship that it has been, but we're very much friends as a result of all of this too. So, yeah, I was very guarded in the beginning for sure.
Yes. Would you be comfortable if I were to ask you in this unique journey you and Marv have had in his grief and healing, what has stood out for you as some of the biggest kind of your life lessons as Carol, the social worker, and Carol, the grief counselor?
Ooh, I feel like I need a moment to think about that.
Take your time, please.
Let's see what has stood out as moments. Oh my goodness. I've learned so much from this experience with him, in part because he was so willing to be open and vulnerable, I think. And many people are not. You kind of have to pull and dig a little bit to get them to even be able to find words to express what they're feeling. So he was able to do that. It was an advantage. Um, but let's see. I hindsight. I think he taught me a lot in how valuable it truly is. Some of the things that we advise people to do or counsel people to do. Um, Sometimes people may go into doing those things and sometimes they may not. So you never really know, is that even really a good practice? Um, for example, the idea of journaling. Journaling for him became hugely important. And I learned I needed to do that as well, even more heavily than I normally do for myself. What were the feelings that you're feeling in that moment? Because you're going to forget a little bit after time passes. What actually didn't work? What did work? What helped? What seemed to allow him to relax? What helped him take another step of, I think I can do one more life skill that I haven't tried since I've lost Marty. Um, and I think being present was probably our number one discovery together. In the moment, what are you feeling? And it sounds very Psych 101-ish, which I don't want to do, but staying in that moment, staying with what it is you're actually feeling and being able to say that to someone, being able to verbalize it kind of gives credence to it. It's affirming. Um, you're not stuffing anything, which just makes all of those grief processes take so much longer. I think if you stuff it, you're able to get it out. So staying present, probably his willingness to go into it. Perhaps the relationship we had of trust felt like an important thing to have established. I'm not telling anyone. If you want to tell someone, okay, and then we could do it together, but everything is confidential. You can be whoever you are, no judgment, no advice giving on my part, but just to be here for you and hear your story. So I'm thinking being present, being willing to go ahead and approach whatever is so hurtful to say. The journaling experience I found out was it is a therapy to write. You're actually allowing your body to let go of something when you do that. I think it enabled him to express, no, we weren't worried about grammar or artistic or writing ability. We were just getting the words down on paper. Sometimes you can even write with your left hand instead of your right or whatever, just to get that flow coming from your thoughts. That was a good thing. And drawing, art was another thing he did, which was interesting. So there is that expression. It was a physical expression. And I think his traveling was also a physical expression. So I learned that there are these things that we've actually advised people to do that actually do help. It was a reinforcing experience, I think. And the fact he would call and talk or just know I was there as someone to hear him when he just couldn't quite think clearly, he felt, or that was kind of his description. Somewhere to put these words, I don't quite know what to do next, words to interact with another person was vital, I think, to him. I think he would say, don't do this alone, would probably be his takeaway. I think I also would hold that same view of having realized I really need to be there. So it felt very validating and important that we had established that relationship. I was grateful we had that.
Awesome answer. Yes. Thank you. Okay. As far as the conversation flow, I think we're at complete. And so just thank you for sharing more about, your perspective, your experience in this grief and healing journey.
Yeah, I am grateful that you have that you did this. It's fun to talk about it because I don't know, without you offering something like this, I don't know where people would go. I don't know where they would get that information. And it's so lonely that the experience itself, that I'm just grateful that you're providing that, really.
Thank you so much for tuning into the conversation with Carol. I'm deeply grateful for your trust in Grief Refuge and what we share here on this podcast. Grief and healing is important work, and although it can be very painful, it's really worth it to help heal your mind, to help heal your heart, and to help heal your soul. Remember that if you need more support right now, download the Grief Refuge app. It's the best tool to help you know that your grief matters. Plus, all the wisdom and the insight shared on the app, it really helps you know that there's a path to feeling better. Please search for Grief Refuge on your phone's app store now. Also, please leave a rating and review for this podcast. Your feedback, it's deeply valued, and yes, we listen to it. We want the Grief Refuge podcast to best serve your needs, and the more you let us know, the better we can provide. So please rate and review the Grief Refuge podcast on the player that you're using right now. Thank you so much. Take care. Keep honoring your grief. Keep listening to your heart. Please be kind to yourself. Talk to you soon.